Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and prattle about them on the internet for your entertainment. So here we are at part 2 of looking at Divine Merfolk, and this is another project that is rapidly expanding beyond what I thought it would be. This isn't the first time, I'll admit. For example, I expected Atlantis to take 3 months. It took closer to 5, but I guess this is what happens when you jump into deep dark waters. Let's hope I can come up for air, right? Now, Atlantis and the Mermaids were both projects voted on and approved by my Everwise patrons. So if you would like a voice in upcoming videos and projects, you can join the Everwise for as little as $1 a month at the link below. Let me just say thank you in advance. So, last week we looked at some older examples and we kind of went from west to east, starting in Syria, going to India, Thailand, and then Java. Now we're going to curve back west to Africa, and we're going to follow those stories across the Atlantic, and then we're going to come full circle swinging back to the Mediterranean. So hang on to your seats. So before we get started, I do want to note I'm using online pronunciation guides on how to say some of this stuff. So, if you are a devotee of these deities or these traditions and I'm getting the names wrong, let me apologize right now. Please feel free to leave a correct pronunciation in the comments, or even a place I can go to find the correct pronunciations, and I will do my best to update this. We're going to start in what is today the nation of Nigeria, where the Yoruba people worshipped, among others, the goddess Yemoja. She was the mother of divine spirits called the Alwisha, as well as the mother of humanity. She was charged along with the god Oboltala, the father deity of the Yoruba, with the creation of humanity by the supreme god Olofi. So she basically descended from heavens, gave birth to the first humans and various deities. Basically, this woman did a lot of work. So, unsurprisingly, she is the patron of motherhood, pregnant women, women in general, as well as the goddess of the river Ogun, as well as several other rivers. She is depicted as a human woman, but she's also depicted as having the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a fish. She's also noted for being the protector of children, and from what I could find, she's considered a patient, rather benevolent deity, no surprise there, but when she gets angry, oh boy, hold on to your butt, because she can be incredibly destructive and violent, and she's often compared to a sudden, powerful flood. So, maybe mind your manners and don't provoke the mother of humanity. The initiates to her priesthood, interestingly enough, give themselves facial markings meant to look like fish gills, and she's represented in shrines at various rivers across Nigeria with sacred stones known as ota, placed in hollowed out gourds that are left in river water. Nigeria was one of those places hit hard by the TransAtlantic Slave Trade, where to feed the demands of European colonies in the Americas for disposable labor, over 12 million people were captured in wars or just flat out kidnapped from Africa over the course of 300 years. Many would die en route, killed by mistreatment and neglect. Those who survived would be mostly taken to Brazil and the Caribbean colonies, but there were many who ended up in the colonies that would become the United States, as well as Central America and other parts of South America. The victims of the slave trade brought the worship of their native gods like Yemoja with them, and that worship changed but flourished in the New World. In Brazil and Cuba, she's worshipped as a sea or ocean goddess as opposed to a river goddess. In Brazil, you offer her white roses, and she is the patron of fishermen and shipwreck survivors, as well as considered the spirit of moonlight. She is often synchronized with the Virgin Mary under the titles of Our Lady of Navigators or Our Lady of the Conception. In Cuba, she is the considered mother of all living beings and the owner of the ocean and seas. So, in the Americas, she has become a very important deity in those traditions that are still practiced today. Oshun is another Yoruban river goddess, but she is considered the goddess of sweet water, purity, fertility, love, and due to the sensitivity of the Dreadlord algorithm, terror be on his name, I'm gonna call this romance and move on. She's believed to be the goddess that first created fresh water on Earth, and while Yemoja gave birth to humanity, it's Oshun who makes our life possible because of creating fresh water. She's appealed to by women who are suffering infertility problems. She's also shown to be able to send punishing rains and floods if pissed off. So it's important to mind your manners and stay on her good side. This is another reoccurring theme. Mind your manners, stay on the lady's good side. She's the patron of the city Osobu and is worshipped in a yearly festival. Like Yemoja, she was brought west by the many victims of the TransAtlantic Slave Trade. In Brazil, she's the patron of fresh water, waterfalls, wealth, prosperity, love, and beauty. And people who are looking for help with romantic problems turn to her. She's also called Our Lady of Gold by those seeking wealth. Mamiwata is a goddess of fertility and what we're going to continue to call romance to appease the Dreadlord algorithm, terror be on his name. Mamiwata is worshipped across West Africa, from southeast Nigeria to Senegal and Zambia, as well in nations like Benin, Togo, and Ghana. She's depicted in a wide variety of ways, sometimes as a woman with the lower body of a fish or a snake. Other times she's depicted as fully human, but holding a snake that wraps itself around her. In Nigerian stories, she will often appear to male devotees, seduce them, and demand their utter faithfulness to her from that time on. In exchange, she provides them with material wealth and prosperity. If they renege on the deal, they die alone and broke, so keep that in mind. She is also said to abduct people who are swimming or boating alone, taking them to a realm that is either underwater or accessible only through water. If they're allowed to return, they return with greater spiritual power and understanding. She's also in some places worshipped as a goddess of healing. She is worshipped in the New World, often by Vodun communities, and is very popular with modern artists and writers. The artists and writers of the Caribbean and Central Africa has used her as subject material for poems, paintings, and novels, and more. I do want to note that while these goddesses were brought to the New World through the greed and brutality of humanity to itself, the fact that their worship survived and adapted shows the sheer tenacity of the human spirit and our ability to hold on to things through terrible trials. I am going to say I hope we never produce examples quite like this ever again, though. Having said that, let's turn now to ancient Greece and the Mediterranean. Now, Poseidon was never really depicted as a merman, as far as I could find. And it is entirely possible he wasn't originally a sea god. In the Bronze Age of Mycenaean Greece, he was worshipped for his ability to create earthquakes, for the creation of horses, and his lordship over bulls. Now, this is countered by the fact that his worship took place mainly on the coast, and he was also called the rescuer of ships. So there is some dispute over whether or not Poseidon started off as an earth god and then became a sea god, or always was a sea god. That said, I can't find any reliable source showing me Poseidon with fish parts. The older, more primal sea gods, however, are shown this way. The earliest god I can find who is shown with the lower body of a fish or a serpent is the Titan Oceanus, the embodiment of the earth-circling river and the source of all rain, rivers, springs, and wells. With his wife, Tethys, they nourish all the waters of the earth and were left alone to do their work because they refused to join the other Titans in their war against Zeus. They just had more important things to do, I guess. I should note that Tethys, while married to Oceanus, who is shown with fish parts, herself is never shown with fish or any other animal parts. She's always shown as a rather beautiful human woman. Just something to make a note of. One of their daughters is depicted as the mermaid Oceanid Evrynomi, who is one of the goddesses that Zeus courted before marrying Hera. She is sometimes referred to as Zeus's third wife. While she's not always present, some myths have her aiding Theus, the mother of Achilles, in saving and raising the god Hephaestus after Hera casts him out of Olympus as a newborn for being an ugly baby. And you thought your mother was hard on you. In an interesting note, she has daughters who are called the Graces, and they are considered goddesses of beauty, grace, and creativity. One of those daughters, Aglaea, was Hephaestus' second wife after he divorced Aphrodite for cheating on him with Ares. That's right, Hephaestus has a second wife. We've been lied to, deceived even, on the state of Hephaestus' relationships. Aglaea and Hephaestus even have a daughter, and she is referred to by Homer as Hephaestus' wife. I'm not going to go further down this rabbit hole because this is a merfolk video, but I did want to share this discovery with you. Anyways, back to the merfolk. Then we have Pontus, who is depicted as a giant floating head with crab claws growing from his forehead. He and his wife, Thalassia, who is lucky in that she is depicted having a full human body instead of just being a floating head, but she also has crab claws growing from her forehead. She and Pontus are the creators of all fish and sea creatures, as well as the parents or grandparents of the many upcoming sea gods and goddesses we're going to discuss. One of which is Poseidon's wife, Amphitrite, who is depicted as 100% human in form. And I find that interesting because when you consider that Pontus and Thalassia are both considered the living embodiments of the sea, the salt water itself, that makes Poseidon marrying their daughter kind of like a reflection of those Greek myths where a Greek hero shows up, kills the monster, marries the princess, and inherits rulership of a kingdom. It's just sort of a weird echo there. That said, looking at these two, Pontus and Thalassia, and their children, listen, I owe the Indians and the Thais an apology. Because Makanu is not even a blip on the radar compared to some of the stuff we're about to talk about. I didn't know how strange this tide got, guys. Listen, I apologize. I was wrong to think Makanu was that weird, considering what we're about to deal with. Just to give an example, this fine-looking fellow is Phorcys, son of Pontus and Gaia. He is the lord of the hidden dangers of the deep. He and his wife, Ceto, were also the parents of various sea monsters, like 100-headed sea serpents, various types of dragons, and their most famous children being the Gorgons, Sirens, Echidna, and Scylla. Scylla is also depicted as part woman, part fish, so I'm going to talk about her a bit in this video. In classic art, she is depicted as having the tail and lower body of a fish, the upper body of a woman, and a bunch of canine forepaws. Because, why not? Mythology isn't strange enough, that's why. She's known for devouring sailors who have swum too close to her lair to avoid the sea monster Charybdis, who creates giant whirlpools to swallow up ships. You might remember them from the Odyssey, their most famous appearance, but we're going to talk more about Scylla's backstory in a moment. But first, I'd like to talk about the brothers Proteus and Nereus, sons of Pontus. They are both referred to as the Old Man of the Sea in their respective stories. Both are shown as mermen and both share similar mythologies. For example, Proteus is said to be able to see the future. He is confronted by Menelaus on the way home from the Trojan War, and a wrestling match ensues. Proteus shapeshifts into various creatures like a leopard, a lion, and a large serpent, but Menelaus holds on and forces him to share which gods Menelaus had offended and how to make it up to them so he could get home. Proteus is also called the herdsman of the sea, and his biggest job is to keep watch over Poseidon's seals. There are seals in the Mediterranean. Just as a side note, this would most likely be the Mediterranean monk seal, which is incredibly endangered with a population of just 800 individuals. That said, there is good news. Their population is on an upswing, and the various government and peoples of the region have made their conservation a priority. So, with luck, Proteus won't be out of a job just yet. Let's keep rooting for the seals. Turning to his brother Nereus, I did talk about him in depth in my video covering Thetis, the mother of Achilles, but like his brother, Nereus is a shapeshifter who has the ability to foretell the future, and he's known for knowing just about everything going on in the ocean. So he also gets wrestled to force out information. In this case, it's Hercules who does the wrestling in order to get directions to the golden apple of Hesperides. It's one of his labors. Later art does replace Nereus with Triton, who is the son of Poseidon and Amphitrite. Triton is often shown as his father's herald, with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a fish, and he was also the god of a saltwater lake in Libya. So, just as a side note, when someone talks about a merman being Neptune or Poseidon, odds are it's actually Triton in the art. Most of the art I tracked down claiming to show Poseidon ended up being Triton, just for example. Triton shows up in Greek myths helping the Argonauts when they get stranded in Libya next to his lake. Greek art also tends to show a large group of beings that look like him called the Tritones. I haven't found any evidence that he's their leader or forefather, but I certainly think that's more than possible. Now, moving forward, Glaucus was a mortal fisherman from Botea who discovered a magical herb that granted immortality with a catch. When Glaucus ate it, he became a merman. Now, there are a couple versions of this story. In the first one, he comes across the herb one day, picks it up and holds it, and he finds out that, when he uses it on fish that he had caught, it brings them back to life. And seeing this, he decides, well, I'm going to eat some of it, because if it cures death, how could it be bad for me? Turns out, the herb that cures death will drive you insane, and he went mad until he fell into the sea and was transformed. Heck of a side effect, if you ask me. In a second version of the story that I like a little better, he's taking a break from fishing because his job is not his whole life, and he goes up into the mountains to hunt hares. He chases a hare until it falls over, I guess dead from a heart attack, and for some reason he starts rubbing it with grass that turns out to be the herb sown by Kronos to be fed to the sun horses of Helios to give them the strength and energy to pull the sun across the sky all day. Because, let's be honest, that is a tough job. I think that's a task we can all agree needs a lot of horsepower to get done. No, I'm not apologizing. Well, it turns out when a mortal man eats the divine power grass of the sun horses, trademark pending, he turns into an immortal divine merman. Imagine reading that has a possible side effect of your energy drink. I just want to throw that out there. There's also a odd third version I don't care for as much, where he's the original pilot of the Argo and gets knocked overboard in a naval battle, and Zeus just turns him into a merman god because reasons? I don't know. Like I said, I don't care for that because it just feels kind of random. Glaucus is known for rescuing fishermen and sailors who fell overboard during storms, and he had a devout following among those two groups. He also had an interesting love life, so let's talk about that. This is where we finally circle back to Scylla. You see, later classical and Roman poets decided that her being just one of the many sea monsters that Phorcys fathered just didn't have enough juice for them. So they gave her a tragic backstory linked to Glaucus here. In this story, Scylla was born a nymph, and like pretty much all nymphs, she looked completely human, and Glaucus fell in love with her. She, however, was kind of repulsed by his fishiness, which, to be fair to Glaucus, falling for nymphs who didn't want anything to do with them seems to be a Greek god tradition. Not a good one, but it is a Greek god tradition. So, faced with the choice of moving on like a mature person or doing something crazy, he goes to the immortal sorceress Circe and asks for a love potion, because the ancient Greeks thought that kind of thing was okay. Circe, on the other hand, decides that Glaucus is just what she was looking for and suggests, hey, instead of chasing someone who doesn't even like you and has to be drugged, why not get with an immortal, powerful sorceress who is into you? Now, honestly, I would consider that a fairly fair offer, and I would be like, you know, we can at least try out a few dates, see if something clicks here. But Glaucus is a Greek god, so instead of giving Circe a shot, he announces he'll never stop loving Scylla. Said immortal sorceress does not take this well. She sneaks off and poisons a pool that Scylla bathes in and turns her into a monster. From which I can tell that does actually kill Glaucus's interest in her, so much for all those announcements of undying passion, right? Glaucus would go on to have other affairs, for example with Ardane, the sister of the Minotaur, who Theseus abandoned after she helped him kill the Minotaur. Theseus is just the worst. Glaucus would end up fighting Dionysus for her hand, but he would lose that fight. Glaucus would also go on to abduct the princess of Rhodes, Sime, and name an island after her, so unfortunately his romantic behavior would be fairly typical for Greek gods. Okay, now that we've covered a wide variety of divine mermaids and mermen across different cultures, let's talk about the themes that have come up repeatedly across these mythologies here, and themes we're going to see more of from what I can tell in my research. There's the theme of transformation. That is a big theme. You're going to see more shape-shifting and more, transformation, both voluntary and involuntary, so just keep that in mind. Romance, both physical and emotional, are also big themes. You're also going to see illicit and more wholesome romances in here as well. We also see merfolk as being dangerous in some cases, representing the dangers of the sea or nature, or having supernatural powers of flood and storm. That said, there are also benevolent merfolk who serve as mentors or protectors to humanity. So we're going to see a complicated relationship in these stories and myths. Keep all these themes in mind, though. They're going to come back. Well, that does it for our divine merfolk, but I'm sure some of you think I've left someone off the list. So next week, we're going to talk about what might be the most famous fish god and how he isn't actually a fish god. Join me next week as we talk about Dagon, the Philistine god from the Bible, who most of you likely know from Lovecraft and fantasy works. Hopefully, I'll be sharing some stuff with you that you didn't know. That said, I hope you found this week's video informative or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like or a comment or consider subscribing. All of those help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you would like to vote on upcoming works or would like to consider directly supporting the channel, join the Everwise at my Patreon or just make a donation at my Coffee. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to Big Steve, who remains my biggest supporter. Until next week, folks, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.